Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 11th of October 2023. Let's go to the military aid segment where we usually start this second piece. So Zelensky has arrived on an unannounced visit to the NATO headquarters in Brussels. A Ramstein meeting is also scheduled to take place today where the president will participate live for the first time. So this is happening right now. This is why there's been a flurry of announcements for aid over the last 24 hours that goes against the lack of aid that we have seen announced over the last, I guess, week or so. The other news has been kind of front and center. The situation in Israel has meant that maybe things have been announced and we just haven't heard about them. But certainly I think you can see by the amount of tabs that things are moving on this front. So Zelensky arrives in Brussels and says, our first priority is air defense. So I find this interesting because you might think he'd say ATACMS distance missiles, and obviously they are still important, but as has been stated by American concerns and NATO, air defense really is still the number one priority when you are continually seeing Odessa region struck, when Ismail and Reni are being hammered, and Chornomorsk here as well as is a port, and Odessa itself that is being targeted. You know that the Ukrainians need as much air defense as possible, because as soon as they get that sorted, you can rest assured the Russians will find some other area that lacks air defenses and will hammer that. And so yeah, air defense is super important for the functioning of Ukraine. But he goes on, we need it on very specific locations in Ukraine to defend our electricity infrastructure, our grain supplies and storages. So still worried about the autumn and winter attacks on the electricity infrastructure as we saw last year. And of course, long-range weapons and artillery. So still that, they still need those and want those ATACMS missiles, those Taurus cruise missiles, as well as artillery pieces and artillery ammunition. These three things are needed to win. Here we have NATO saying we already have 2.4 billion euros in contracts to increase the supply of ammunition. Thank you very much. That's from Jens Stoltenberg in Brussels. We are constantly ramping up production to help Ukraine fight this war and allow Ukraine to win this war. It's great when you get a cup of tea delivered. Artillery ammunition is still massively important for Ukraine. Goodness. So we move on. Germany announces a winter support package for Ukraine. This is a significant package. Germany is delivering a new support package to Ukraine, which includes air defense systems worth around 1 billion euros. That's $1.06 billion. German Defense Ministry announced yesterday. The package includes additional Patriot air defense system, which Germany pledged on October the 5th. It would provide to Kiev an RST and Gepard systems as well. The systems will help Ukraine better protect its critical infrastructure. So, as you can see here, Patriot system, command and control unit, a radar, 8 launchers, and over 60 missiles. I wonder how long 60 missiles last in the Patriot at the sort of rates Russia are attacking. New RST system. So we knew this was coming. This is now the official announcement. 10 Leopard 1A5 tanks, 3 Gepard systems. There are 12 announced the other day, so I don't know whether there is a slight difference between, because there's the RST system and 12 Gepards. Well, here now we've got 3 Gepards and the RST system included here. So I don't know if one of them's wrong or whether there are separate things going on. Transport of nearly transport medical supplies, and total of that package of nearly 1 billion euros. So yeah. It is a significant assistance by Germany. Germany really are stepping up. So you might slag them off for Taurus or lack of Taurus cruise missiles, but man, they are doing some serious aid to the Ukraine. And not only that, Rheinmetall, and I'm not sure that this is any different from what I've announced in the last week anyway, but you know, more official documentation to the claim that Rheinmetall a German arms manufacturer, has secured another substantial order to provide over 100,000 shells for Ukraine. So I was saying yesterday that they were making shells for Germany, for the German armed forces, but the idea is that those would go to Ukraine. Now, America, as the US, is still providing aid. They've announced today, I mean, this says tomorrow, but that's now been announced today, a $200 million package. AIM-9 missiles, that's apparently for a new system. I don't know what system that is, but could well be another air defense system that they're providing that's not been announced. In fact, if we go to what Lloyd Austin says,
its latest security assistance package for Ukraine, valued at $200 million. It includes...
First thing I say is I don't know why they announced this, because I reckon that's counterproductive for the American audience. They'll think that's $200 million out of our pockets or out of the education system or whatever, and it's not. It's not how it works, and I've talked ad infinitum, ad nauseum about this kind of pricing. So... yeah, I won't go over that again, but I think it's counterproductive. Just announce a kit.
AIM-9 munitions for a new air defense system that we will soon deliver to Ukraine.
So is that part that I thought was worth noting, that they're going to deliver a new air defense system. I don't know if that's part of the governmental assistance or whether that's one of the Patriot systems that's being bought by Ukraine from Raytheon, one of the 5, or AIM-9 missiles would, I don't know. So there is obviously another system on the way. Anti-drone equipment, HIMARS 105mm and 155mm ammunition, high precision ammunition, so that'd be things like Excalibur, I would have thought. TOW anti-tank missiles, that's for the Bradley, 84 anti-tank weapons and additional equipment. Yeah, really useful stuff there. Anti-drone equipment will be counter-drone equipment will be super important too. Right, so good stuff, the US, and I'm sure there'll be other bits and pieces that will come out today. I'll add them in for tomorrow as and when I get them. Finland has announced the allocation of an additional 92 million euros to support Ukraine and countries affected by Russian aggression, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Finland said. I just want to say, actually, in terms of the money, if you take that as prima facie accurate and meaningful, I don't particularly. It is interesting. The US here has provided $200 million worth, and Germany has provided over $1 billion worth, so 5 times more. And all this isn't a competition. This isn't like they've done bad, but all I'm pointing out is that Germany really have stepped up over the last 6 months. There is no doubt that Germany is now, your number 2 supporter, and is really flexing their muscles in terms of military aid. Right. So yeah, Finland has announced support to Ukraine and countries affected by Russian aggression. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland has said countries affected by Russian aggression. I wonder what that means and who that refers to. Croatia to assist demining efforts in Ukraine. They've signed a bilateral agreement, Ukraine and Croatia, on joint demining operations in a war-torn country. The cabinet ministers announced yesterday. Specifics on the agreement include the transfer of technical expertise and special safety equipment, as well as educational programs for civilians and capability development. That's really good news. Thank you, Croatia. Now, Denmark will transfer the first F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine at the beginning of 2024. This time is fast approaching, actually, isn't it? Defense Minister Troels Lund Poulsen expects the Danish F-16s will be sent to Ukraine in April and March, so not quite the beginning, the end of the beginning maybe. But there is a large amount of work, quote, to ensure that the Ukrainians are able to handle them in the places they have to stand. In other words, there's work to be done with the airfields, there's work to be done with maintenance and logistics, so on and so forth. Which is nothing we didn't know, right? Belgium will transfer several F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine. Their exact number is not yet known. This was stated by the head of Ministry of Defense, Ludovine Dedonde, on Belgian RTL. According to her, the aircraft will be sent from 2025, so that's a lot further off than the 2024 Danish ones. The Comeback Alive Fund has received the first batch of 5,000 plus loitering munitions, one-way drones purchased as part of Operation Unity. This is where I'm going to talk again about the asymmetry between Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine seem to be adept now at producing or procuring massive numbers of really good drones and providing them for Ukraine, sending them to the front line. I don't think Russia has that, certainly not at the moment. 10,000 drones will be equipped with Ukrainian-made cluster and high-explosive munitions and will be handed over to dozens of armed forces brigades. I've seen today footage of drones, these sorts of drones, taking out trenches or parts of trenches. So in the absence of perhaps artillery, in the absence of air, aviation strikes and large numbers of bombing, they have to pick up that slack with things like drones, and drones are becoming useful. I think it's less efficient and more it's probably not as costly actually, but it's costly in terms of time, rather than one air sortie that might cost an awful lot of money but flattens an entire trench line with, you know, an A10 flattening a trench line with all sorts of heavy weaponry, heavy ordnance. You have to be sending up drone after drone and striking just an RPG head there that will take out maybe a couple of people there, maybe slightly miss over there. Maybe, you know, you're not flattening trench lines, but it is what they have to do. This is their options, given they don't have their advantage, let alone superiority, let alone supremacy in the area. Okay, the Himera radio. So this is a Ukraine rolling out a secure radio to counter Russian electronic warfare. I don't know if this is an answer to Starlink, maybe having issues with Starlink in terms of procurement of these bits of kit, whether they are worried about the security given, you know, Elon Musk, etc., etc. So the Himera radio utilizes advanced frequency hopping spread spectrum technology. So it's not so much this would be not so much satellite stuff, but more localized technology to effectively counter Russians' electronic warfare tactics, creating a nearly undetectable communication system. That might be worth looking into at a greater depth in an extra. I'll bear that one in mind. Here we have the drone protection netting that I was talking about in the last video. These are UAV Lancet catchers and other drones as well. They can be, you know, made to fit any bit of equipment really. Constructed by, I forget the company. It's a Ukrainian company. The piece of kit really, but why it's taken this long to get these out there? I was talking about this 6 months ago. I don't understand. I mean, yeah, I don't know, whatever. I would have been building these straight away as soon as the first Lancet hit. We saw, do you remember, we saw some Gepards get taken out, and then maybe it was the S300 or something. You're like, you know, the Gepards are to protect the S300s, and here we have separately, they're taken out, right, you need a Gepard to protect the S300, and they need to be in position to shoot these Lancets, and you need, you know, around these S300s and around even the Gepard if it's parked up, you need these bits of kit. You protect your high value stuff. Yeah, even if they only work 30% of the time, hey, that's still 30% of the losses from Lancets that you are protecting from. A remotely controlled tractor with an anti-mine shield somewhere in Ukrainian fields. Obviously, being the breadbasket of the world in many respects, these are incredibly useful, right? And the Ukrainian farmers are being fairly adept at adapting their equipment to be able to operate them in dangerous mined areas, right? I've already gone through that. Now, this might annoy some people. But last time I talked about how some of the NATO training wasn't good enough. Some former armed forces personnel from various places were saying, no, it's not. NATO training is really good, and blah blah blah. And I think it's like I said before, it's good for your very basic troops that have maybe never fought before being drafted from civilian life, from Civvy Street, on into the armed forces, give them NATO training. They're going to get up. They're going to get some decent basic training. But for a lot of the soldiers who have been drawn from the front lines to be given this training, then sent back to the front lines, they're finding actually it's not really well adapted to the Ukrainian war. And here it is coming from Roland Oliphant, who's been speaking to people in the southern front line over the last, I don't know how long he's been out there, but he's spoken to quite a few people by all accounts. This is what he has to say.
Yeah, hi. I'm just thinking about what you said.
No, I tell you what, I had it on 2 times speed. You probably don't want it on 2 times speed.
Said to me, and talking about the current debate about Western support, I think there's a couple of lessons or a couple of things to take away. The first is there are serious things that I think NATO and the West have to have a look at and acknowledge went wrong. One of which I think is the training. I mean,
I had to stop that because I inhaled my tea. I do apologise. Don't drink tea on camera, Pierce.
Have to have a look at and acknowledge went wrong. One of which I think is the training. I mean, pretty much everyone I've spoken to, Ukrainian fighters, pretty unimpressed with the level of training they received from NATO, and a universal, a very widespread sense that it didn't anticipate the kind of fighting they ended up doing. It was kind of, there are patches of, these guys saying patches of absolute brilliance, really, really useful stuff, but also this weird emphasis on stuff that would have been appropriate in the war on terror, but is completely inapplicable to storming a trench defended by the Russian army. So that
there, and the fact he said is near universal. Like everyone he's spoken to seems to say the same thing. Some great stuff from the NATO training, but a lot of stuff that really needs adapting to this war. And we've heard that previously. I've reported that to you from other sources as well. This seems to be indisputable now.
That's one thing. There's other little holes. Things like, it turns out M16 rifles, which these guys were issued with, are not very good for storming trenches because they're too long and they tend to jam a bit with the kind of dust and dirt that you get. And these guys went on that particular assault I was telling you about with AKs that they'd taken off Russians in previous assaults. So all these little lessons. But the other thing, these kind of highlights. So number one, the Bradley fighting vehicle genuinely saves lives. These guys consider it absolutely amazing. If they tried to do what they did in old Soviet kit, they would all be dead, basically. So that's really important. The other thing, US cluster munitions, very controversial. A lot of quite appropriate concerns about the morality of using these things, but nonetheless, in this particular battle, these guys were saying those weapons arrived at just the right time. They immediately made a difference, and what they do is they break up Russian counterattacks. So it allows them to secure tree lines, and then when the Russians start pushing forward, the cluster munitions allow them to hold on to that new position until they can, reinforce it and dig in. And that all leads me to the point of we're all watching what's happening in the United States at the moment about continued, whether they're going to continue to fund support to Ukraine. Stuff like that is really, really crucial. So there is no overestimating. It's really, really important what happens in the US over the next couple of weeks. But that question about continued funding, continued supplies of these weapons shouldn't be underplayed. I think all our eyes should be on that.
Really interesting. And the attack he refers to is coming in my extra video later. I recorded it yesterday. It's just a really good segment. This is a really good episode of Ukraine the Latest. Go and listen to it all. It's called Russian Missiles Rain Death on Civilians. It's from maybe 2 days ago. 4 days ago, as you can see there. It is a really good one from this segment. So the 20 minutes before that of Roland Oliphant giving his feedback from going to the front lines and speaking to these people on the front lines, learning how difficult and time consuming attacking these tree lines is, like how horrendously challenging this kind of warfare is for the Ukrainians. It was a fascinating segment. Right, let's move on to geopolitical topics. Here we have Zelensky going to Bucharest. That's yesterday, meeting the Romanian president, Klaus Iohannis. He announced the opening of a new grain corridor through Moldova and Romania. So here we have Moldova Remember, there's Transnistria here down the side, which is this annexed area. A grain corridor through Moldova and into Romania will be one solution to the lack of a large amount of maritime traffic going through the Bosphorus Straits from the area, the Odessa region. Now, there are reports that basically there is now pretty continuous maritime traffic hugging the coastline. There is this safe route. It's obviously not ideal, not as good as it was, slightly less efficient and more time consuming, one would assume, as well as there not being the volume that there would have been prior to the war. But it is something, and it is helping to lubricate the grain export, because what you don't really want is being forced to transport all the grain by road really into Europe, flood the markets in Europe. Okay, then now there's like the Danube River, and now there are railway routes, and so there are lots of these options going through Romania, going through Poland, going through a number of different places. But it will be more expensive, less efficient, and not ideal. So I guess the more routes you have, the less able Russia are to hinder the export of grain. So that's good. But ideally, you want the sea routes to be as open as possible. Now, the president of Romania officially supports the beginning of Ukraine's accession to the EU in 2023. The president stated that this at a press conference after the meeting with Zelensky, and the creation of an F-16 training center of Romania was also announced. That's been previously announced. It's probably halfway through being kind of built and done, or they may even be doing it already. I don't know. Swedish car concern Volvo has disconnected Russian car owners from its software. Earlier, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and Audi also did so. I remember reporting some months back that someone stating that they'd never seen so many Chinese cars in Moscow. These new kind of Chinese car makes that were never really around are now around in some quite significant numbers. So European car manufacturers are pulling out or giving less support to car owners in Russia, and that is forcing them to go east with their consumption. There are, though, these loopholes where you've got a lot of second-hand cars coming in through the Eurasian countries as well. A draft resolution recognizing Hamas as a terrorist organization and condemning their activities was submitted to the Verkhovna Rada, so Ukrainian Parliament of Ukraine. I talked about this in the previous video with one Muslim fighter. It's anecdotal, but he was pretty upset with the fact that Ukraine had done this. But this isn't. I think this is pretty acceptable. This is condemning Hamas. It's fairly uncontroversial, in my opinion, to condemn Hamas, but to be careful to differentiate Palestinians from Hamas, as in Palestinians as a whole. Yes, all of Hamas are Palestinians, but not all Palestinians are Hamas. So you need to make that distinction and clearly do that, because you don't want to piss off the entire Muslim world that might be otherwise broadly in support of Palestinian self-determination. So these are fine lines that you have to navigate carefully, and yeah, I'm sure they're well aware of that. UEFA, this is brilliant. UEFA revokes the decision to allow Russian youth teams to play in the European Championships. This is a success of boycotting. Yay to all those teams, including England, I'd like to say, but Poland, Latvia, Sweden, Iceland, a whole bunch of the Baltic and Nordic nations doing that, vowed to boycott the games against Russian teams, under 17 teams, and now UEFA have made the right decision, so I'm happy with that. Right. Lastly, an undersea pipeline has been damaged between Estonia and Finland. This is really quite a big news. So extensive damage to an undersea gas pipeline and communications cable connecting Finland and Estonia, quote, could not have occurred by accident and appears to have been a result of, quote, deliberate external act, Finnish authorities have said. Quote, it is likely that damage to both the gas pipeline and communication cable is a result of external activity, the Finnish president has said on Twitter, adding that the cause of the damage was not yet clear. Local media cited unnamed government sources as saying Russia's sabotage was suspected, while regional security experts said a Russian survey vessel had recently been observed making repeated visits in the vicinity of the Baltic Connector pipeline. Right, this is very important because, well, for all the kind of obvious reasons, there is quite a lot of traffic, like maritime traffic around here, and so it's potentially quite difficult to get away with doing something like this. The other pipeline, the Nord Stream pipeline, was a little bit more in the open. It's a little bit closer here, so that might be something to bear in mind. This is much more likely to be Russia as opposed to any other actors. There are loads of conspiracy theories going out around this, but it's whereas you could build a case for the Nord Stream 2 pipeline being any international actor, really. The US having a vote in that, Ukraine, so on and so forth. This is much more likely, in my opinion, to be Russia. So here is Matti Pezu, who is a PhD leading researcher, Finnish for the Atlantic. He's an expert in Northern European and Euro-Atlantic security. So he says, sabotage of the Baltic Connector and the telecom cable connecting Finland and Estonia must be placed in a broader context. Here's a thread from a Finnish perspective. Contrary to expectations, Russia's immediate response to the Finnish NATO bid was muted. And this is true, actually. They didn't really... I don't suppose there was anything they could do, and it's a bit embarrassing. However, this year, Finland has been subject to harsher treatment. Moscow, for example, took over the Russian assets of Fortum and withdrew its agreement for operation of the Finnish consulate in St. Petersburg. Furthermore, several Russian top officials were recently singled out Finland, portraying it as an offensive American vassal. The suspected sabotage would mark the combination of this increasingly aggressive policy. Moscow likely has two broad aims vis-a-vis Finland. It wants to intimidate Finland and NATO from building a robust deterrence and defence posture in Northern Europe. The Russian leadership also seeks to transform the rather neutral domestic image of Finland. Sabotaging critical infrastructure fits in the strategy of intimidation. Russia wants to sow fear among Finnish decision makers and the public, and likely the aim is to limit Allied presence in Finland as well as the depth of its NATO integration. It goes without saying that the acts of sabotaging the Gulf of Finland were dramatic. That said, neither the gas pipeline nor the telecom cable were absolutely vital for the critical functions of Finnish society or for the security of its supply. That is to say that Russia has far more destabilizing and disruptive measures in its grey zone toolkit. So in other words, this isn't the biggest thing they could have done, which on the one hand is like, yeah, so that's cool. But on the other hand, it's like, so they've got more headroom to kind of move into. Moreover, the acts of sabotage took place outside the territorial waters of Finland and Estonia, i.e. Russia did not violate their sovereignty. We do not yet know whether the measures were a prelude to something more disrupting or just a one-off measure. Perhaps we should treat occasional aggressive grey zone acts as a new normal of Northern European security characterized by NATO-Russia confrontation. One last point, Finnish leaders and experts have already underscored that the acts of sabotage were not a surprise. As recently as late August, President reminded Finns that Finland must remain prepared for malign measures from Russia. Interesting. So this is the new norm, perhaps, and Russia just doing overtly aggressive, warlike actions is something we should expect. Of course, what are the repercussions to that? If Russia can be evidenced as culpable for that, what can Finland and Estonia do that they aren't already doing? And this is, I find stuff like this interesting because it's the same with cybersecurity. I did a segment on this. Like cybersecurity, if you can prove that Russia have taken down networks that support your hospital networks, for example, in your country, whatever country you may be, the US, Finland, whatever, Estonia, what's the difference between them causing disruption like that and bombing those places, and bombing the infrastructure? So taking, if Moscow or the Kremlin sent over planes that drop bombs on an electricity substation in Estonia, right? Or they got hackers to take out that substation. Functionally, there's no difference. Yet, if the bombers do it, that's an act of war. And in the cyber warfare world, that is an act of cyber warfare, but you kind of differentiate it. But if it's functionally the same, that to me should be like, well, we're at war now. Like, you have done that to us. You have virtually come into our country and disrupted and caused chaos, and maybe led to deaths in hospital, for example, of patients who have been hit. You know, there are ramifications to taking out electricity substations or hospital networks or whatever. Surely that is just as valid an act of war as dropping bombs. So I think there's a lot of discussion to be had around here as to what the repercussions for these activities are. If they can prove that that is Russia, then, you know, is that NATO at war with Russia now? Flip side, what the devil goes on with the idea that, as the Germans seem to think at the moment, although they are happily giving Ukraine lots of assistance, that the Ukrainians were behind the Nord Stream pipeline. However, I think the end result, the Nord Stream pipeline going, is of a net benefit to all the countries involved, actually. I think that screws over Russia the most. And so that's possibly why people are willing to turn a blind eye if there are indeed, you know, if there is indeed good evidence that it was Ukraine, and it's still an open book, that one. So I think these are possibly not comparable. But, you know, if you have an aggressive nation rather than an allied nation, I mean, that's complex. But an aggressive nation coming to do aggressive things to your infrastructure, what happens? Is that war? You know, you can make a really good case that it should be. Anyway, let me know what you think. Please like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate all your support. Please tell your friends about this channel if you appreciate this channel. If you don't appreciate this channel, still tell your friends how wonderful it is, because that'd be nice. Anyway, thanks. Take care. Speak soon.